All right, there's a question here submitted that says, I need to be, is it important to be consistent with the amount of deep green veggies I eat? This is hard to do, especially while traveling overseas. Suggestions. So I have not seen, I mean, it's great to be as consistent as possible with sanity. So yes, the more often you can be sane, and a huge part of being sane is eating vegetables. So the more consistently you can eat vegetables, the better. There's not the thing, one of the coolest things about going sane, and the longer you go sane, the more you will notice this, is, and this is why progress versus perfection works, is think of your metabolic system a little bit like, not a little bit, a lot like your immune system. So if you have a healthy immune system, if you temporarily catch cold, it's not the end of the world, because while you might get sick for a little bit, your immune system itself is healthy, so it will work to resolve that problem over time. So the key thing is not to you can never avoid all bacteria and all viruses. That's not possible. But what you can do is you can keep your immune system as healthy as possible, so that when things do go not according to plan, aka viruses and bacteria, you can recover quickly. Think of your metabolic system the same way. If you have a healthy metabolic system, a little bit of insanity isn't going to break the system. It's just like a little bit of cold. And that's like, so when we heal the system itself, if we go a little bit insane, you're not going to gain 25 pounds overnight, and your HbA1c levels aren't going to go out of whack overnight. And that also helps to explain why it seems like children can get away with eating insanely, whereas as we get older, it seems like we can't eat insanely and get away with it anymore. What's actually happening there is not that children have some unique genetic gift. In fact, children, I would argue, are the most, they need the most protection against insane foods and the most focus on sane foods, because their bodies are growing, right? I mean, we know this. We think about, like, you know, the smallest forms of children, which would be children that aren't born yet. And we know that nutrition for those fetuses is extremely, extremely important. Yet somehow the media tells us that as soon as the child passes through the uterine canal and is in the real world, that now it's like burgers and French fries and chicken nuggets are healthy for them, aka a children's menu and children's cereal is essentially the section of the menu and the section of the cereal aisle that is the most insane. And that is, I think, reprehensible to subject our, like, as a the people who need the most protection and who are most sensitive to nutritional distress are the same people who are targeted by these corporations. It just blows my mind. And I think in 20 years, we're going to look back on that and say, how did that happen? As we understand more and more of what these foods do to children. But the point is that if a child has only been exposed to insanity for 5 years, so say you have a 5-year-old, yeah, I mean, a 5-year-old only had, let's look at the standard American diet. Standard American diet is about 60% processed insanity, all right? So maybe, you know, the body is resilient, the body can recover from things. So just like if a child scrapes their knee, right, the child's knee heals faster than 50 years later. Right? Like, so your skin, if you get cut, the older you are, the longer it takes to heal. And for a child, if they are exposed to a little bit of insanity, their metabolism can heal that quickly. But then as we get older, after a while, our metabolic system is just like, I mean, if I'm getting 60% of my calories for 40 years from insanity, that like metabolic immune system, to combine the metaphors, is just worn down. So at that point, we smell a cheesecake and we gain weight because our metabolic system is just, it's broken. It's you know, any sort of disease, like the reason HIV and AIDS is such a heartbreaking disease is it attacks the immune system itself, right? So if your immune system is out of commission, a cold can kill you. But if your immune system is okay, you know, you can bounce back from that. So as you go sane, as you heal your metabolism, if you have to travel, for example, or if you go to a birthday party, or if it's Thanksgiving, or if it's the holidays and there's a little bit of insanity, you're going to bounce back from that. And I just think that's so, yeah, I mean, that's why progress and perfection works, progress versus perfection works. That's why this is so about being patient and taking time to heal. And it also kind of explains why it seems like children can get away with eating a certain, they're not getting away. They're sort of just like stealing from Peter to pay Paul. There's only so much insanity that our metabolic system can take. And, you know, after a certain number of years of that insanity, it kind of builds up and breaks down. So hopefully that is helpful. Lou's got a freezer, so that's excellent. Gene has a question. Oh, yes. Coumadin regulation. So I need to know if you have suggestions about to keep these greens consistent while traveling. So Gene, I am gonna, if you don't mind, I would. This is gonna get into the territory of your primary care physician. My high level recommendation is, like, when I travel, what I do is I use Garden in My Glass and a bunch of stuff from the SANE store extensively, because it's very hard to eat greens on the go. And it's very easy to take powdered greens on an airplane. And then salad bars at grocery stores are one of my good friends. So the sort of ready to eat salad bars at grocery stores. And then whenever I have a chance at a restaurant, I'll get a big salad. And hopefully that's helpful. Hopefully that's helpful. I don't know if that's helpful. Let me know. Let me know via chat if that's helpful. So the next question here that was sent in has to do with, why is it important to drink copious amounts of water? What does it do in your body? So there's a couple of reasons why drinking water is super important. One is it creates a state in your body known as hypoosmolality. And what that means in English is just that the balance of certain substances inside of your cells and outside of your cells changes such that it is actually easier for your body to pass fatty acids out of the cells and burn them for energy. So in order to burn fat, you're literally taking triglyceride, which is the technical term for fat stored in your body, and it needs to leave the cells, go into your bloodstream, and get burnt or burned, excuse me. When you drink a lot of water, that process is easier for your body to do. Water also helps eliminating toxins. It helps to, when you're going sane, you're going to be taking in a lot of certain nutrients. It helps to process urea out of your system. It helps with protein metabolism. It helps with the fiber and not feeling certain senses of bloating, because it helps to eliminate waste more readily. So the short version, and I would say the third big reason, is it makes it easier not to drink a bunch of insane nonsense, right? So if you're thirsty, it's a lot harder to say no to insane soda if you're really thirsty than if you're not thirsty at all. So beverages or liquids, just like solids, we talk about eating so much good food that you're too full for insane food. The same thing applies with liquids. So the idea is to drink so much water, or potentially things like green tea or white tea, or there's a bunch of other good teas, but green tea is very common and very good, that you're just too full for the other thing. So hypoosmolality makes it easier to burn fat technically. It helps with the digestion of foods and elimination of certain substances. And then it also makes it much easier to avoid insane beverages. So that was a much cleaner answer than some of my other answers. So hopefully that was helpful. All right, Gene, looks like my previous answer helped you, so I'm hopefully happy to hear about that. All right, emotional eating. All right, cool. So we got some questions coming in here now about some of the emotional stuff that I alluded to in our last session. So I really need your help now to help me to not turn this into a giant lecture, because when I get going, it's hard for me to stop. And these are things which, like, if I write another book, well, there's probably gonna be one about, well, I can't tell you, but some of them are gonna be, one of them at some point is gonna be purely about the psychological aspects of things, because that's always been a passion of mine. And I can go on about this forever. But a couple things about the emotional eating and just emotional aspects of sanity. So first, let's talk about emotional eating specifically. So sorry, and what I need your help with is questions in the chat box, or if it's like, Jonathan, I want this to be more interactive. I do too. So help me to make it more interactive. Don't let me just ramble. The emotional eating, right? So there's two aspects to it. One is there is an emotional trigger which causes us to, I'm going to talk real geeky here, right? So emotional eating is essentially a certain type of chemistry takes place in our brains, right? That makes us feel a certain way, right? And this is by way of example, and forgive me if this is sort of obvious, but it's a good example, right? Like, so why do people take things like opiates? So like heroin. Heroin is such a terrible drug because it is extremely addictive. And it's really good at what it does. It's terrible for you, but what I mean by it's really good at what it does is heroin creates a state in the brain that is so euphoric that, I mean, you can see this, right? People will, my father is an addictions counselor, as is my sister. So, I mean, my sister and father tell me these stories of addicts who, like, the state in a heroin addict's brain is so intensely positive that they will literally and heartbreakingly, like, harm their child to achieve that psychological state. Now, I'm not saying this to like make this a sad call. What I'm saying is that our emotions are a set of chemistry in our brain, right? So there's opiate receptors, there's serotonin, melatonin, dopamine, da 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 da. Don't need to get into that here, but when we are triggered to eat emotionally, the trigger for that is usually there's an environmental or psychological cue, which then causes the release of certain hormones and neurotransmitters in our brain, right? So why did I give the example of heroin? Well, heroin is an example of an opiate, and things like morphine, Oxycontin, and sugar are opiates as well. So they bind to certain receptors in our brain. And this is not technically accurate, but it's a metaphor to think of it. It's almost like it's almost like I'm sad or I'm anxious receptors kind of like open up in the brain, and like sugar or other opiates, they can come in and go, bloop, no, you're not. And it's like, oh, I feel better. So that's kind of what happens with those substances. So when we want to eat emotionally, there's at least two aspects. One is there's a certain type of brain chemistry that takes place. And it's sort of like these receptors open up and say, feed me with happiness. Basically, right? I am sad, I'm stressed, I'm anxious. Boop, feed me with happiness. And then, so that happens. Our brain is in a certain state. Often then, we need to find a way to fill these things, okay? So now, the reason it's important to understand that, as there is sort of, there's a stimulus, there's a response, boop, and there is a response to that response. So stimulus, response, and then our response to that neurological response. Whew. All right, so let's unpack each one of those. Stimulus. Sometimes we can change this, sometimes we can't. But the very first, like we can address emotional eating for each three of these components. And this is really advanced stuff. So please, like, if this isn't helpful, or if I'm going too deep, please, or just anything. If you have thoughts, post them in the chat box. If, for example, I have a boss that just makes me crazy, right? That can be the stimulus, which causes boop, which then causes us to go home and say sugar fills that, right? Having a junky boss might not be something we can do a whole lot about, but that is the first area that we can look to address. We can identify the factors in our life that trigger these neurological states. And while we may not be able to change all of them, we might be able to do two things. One is we can try to change some of them, so to avoid the negative stimulus. And if we can't actually avoid it, we have some level of control over, I mean, actually we have a lot of control, but it takes quite a bit of time to control whether or not boop happens, right? So we know, for example, that one of the ways that we differentiate adults from children is if you have a baby, like a baby's like, I'm hungry. Boop, I'm gonna cry and panic. And there's no like, baby is like hunger, stimulus, response is cry immediately. Like same thing with animals that are not as intelligent as humans. Like a deer is like, I hear something, I run immediately, potentially right into traffic. Whereas an adult human, one of the things that says, if someone were to ever say, like, act like an adult or don't act like a child, what they're kind of saying is in between this external stimulus, which then causes a neurological response. It's like, in some ways, the more of an adult we are, the bigger that gap is, right? So if you think of someone like, this is getting really, I mean, I love this stuff, so I hope you do too. But so if you think of like some of the greatest people in history, so like a Margaret Thatcher or a Mother Teresa or a Jesus Christ or Mahatma Gandhi or Abraham Lincoln or Rosa Parks, these are all people who, like, one of the things they're famous for is something happened, like a stimulus happened, Miss Parks, get to the back of the bus, and her brain was like, raw, go crazy. And she was able to take a step back and say, I'm going to choose my response. Mahatma Gandhi, when he was treated a certain way, you know, he chose his response. Jesus Christ is really powerful examples of forgive them, Father, they know not what they do, turn the other cheek. I just got stabbed in the side and my response is to forgive you. I mean, these are people who it wasn't that they didn't have boop happen in their brain. It's that boop happened in their brain. I mean, maybe it happened a little bit less, but they then developed this uncanny ability to choose their response after that. So why did I say all that? I said all that because, so step number one is, like, for example, if we have a junkie boss, if we could possibly change teams, that would be great. But there's an old saying, which is a great one, which is worth writing down if you haven't heard it. And that is, no matter where you go, there you are. I'm gonna say that again. No, and this applies to me almost more than anyone I know. I have my own lowercase insane that I deal with. Everywhere you go, or no matter where you go, there you are, or everywhere you go, there you are. So in addition to trying to take ourselves and remove ourselves from objectively toxic environments, which we should do, there's also ways that we can, to use other people's language, cultivate our own garden, so that when those things happen, they have less of an impact on us. And there's all sorts of I mean, all major religious traditions have ways of doing this. Things like saying, give it to God, or, you know, I can't think of any good examples right now, but like obviously Buddhism has examples of this. There's ancient philosophies such as Stoicism or Taoism, where their whole point of Stoicism, for example, is the domestication of emotions to increase that gap between stimulus and response. Or if you want to go totally secular, like Stephen Covey, all of that stuff. I mean, his whole thing is between stimulus and response, there's a gap. And in that gap, the quality of our life is determined. And that's paraphrasing him directly because I think he's absolutely awesome. All right, so there's avoiding the negative stimulus. Then there is the ability to choose our response to that stimulus. Viktor Frankl is also another great secular teacher of this. He's an Austrian psychiatrist who survived 2 concentration camps and lost his entire family in the concentration camps, and then yet went on to create a fantastic life and to develop his own school of psychotherapy by basically saying, I can choose my response to any stimulus, even being subjected to the most horrific atrocity a human being could ever be exposed to. So if you haven't read Man's Search for Meaning, it's a fantastic book. Okay, emotional eating. Avoid the stimulus in the first place whenever possible. However, then we need to cultivate our own gardens so that we can react with love and compassion and forgiveness to those negative things when they happen. That's its own thing, which maybe we can get into in some other sessions. And I'm also not, like, I have thoughts and I've done a lot of research about that, but my professional claim to fame is not psychotherapy or psychoanalysis. So I'll sort of leave that to the other experts. All right, so there's avoiding the stimulus. There's managing our response to the stimulus. And when we say manage our response to the stimulus, that's essentially saying that instead of it going boop and like wide open, maybe it just goes boop. And a good example of let me just unpack this a little bit. If you've ever been sick, for example, you'll notice that when you're sick or when you feel like garbage, this happens a lot more easily than if you're feeling great. This is why health, physical health, is so tied to mental health. Because when you're sick or tired, anything, stoplight, boop, right? Anything, the dog barks, whereas if you're feeling good, it's like, hey, something objectively bad just happened. Oh, that's okay. The sun will come out tomorrow. You can kind of deal with it. So that's one of the reasons why health physical health is so important to emotional health. But now let's get to the third step. And then I see some awesome chats coming in and I'm going to read those, but I'm kind of going crazy right now. So I got to finish this before I lose it. Okay. So there's avoiding the stimulus. There's making the stimulus do less of this and more of this. And there's all sorts of spiritual, secular, and psychoanalytic ways of doing that. I personally think Stoicism is awesome. And I think Viktor Frankl is awesome. I think Stephen Covey is awesome. I think there's a lot of other good stuff too. Anyway, and then the last part is no matter what, this is still going to happen. And sometimes this is good, right? Like if we never, we're people, right? So at some level, we always have this. We're never satisfied. The reason that human beings are the most dominant species on the planet in many ways is because we're never satisfied. We're like, we can make this better. We can do this better. And then we have progress and we have electricity and we have Google Hangout group coaching calls like this, right? So it's very cool. So then the question just becomes, I've tried to minimize the just total toxic stimulus in my life. Then I've worked to manage my reaction to that toxic stimulus. Now, when I do want to go bloop and put a little bit in here, how can I do that with things that aren't going to make the situation worse, right? Because how do a lot of people do this? Drugs, sex, alcohol, other terrible things, right? So the negative thing happens, boop, bad thing, more bad stuff happens. Downward spiral, not good. Try to avoid the bad thing, try to minimize its impact. And then I see some chats coming in here. It's about using SANE sweets. It's about saying, okay, I'm feeling that I do this personally. I'm about to binge eat. Like I'm just going to go eat a whole lot of food. But before I do that, I'm going to eat a half a head of cabbage. I don't know. You're like, what is this guy talking about? But no, seriously, I'm going to give myself permission to binge eat. But before I do that, I am going to make a giant pot of broccoli and I'm going to force myself to eat it. And I'm going to eat a half a head of spinach, or I'm going to eat a giant green smoothie, or I'm going to eat a bunch of celery or a bunch of sugar snap peas. I'm just going to eat a bunch of vegetables. Why are you going to do that? Because that in some ways it's going to take care of some of the volume that needs to take place, and it's going to help you to make saner choices after that. So when you want to react to the emotional eating, and again, I know it sometimes sounds a little bit silly, but like Anthony Robbins, who has some great teachings as well, he had this old advice that he gave back in a tape that I listened to his in the early 90s. And he was like, if you're feeling really bad, just like jump out of your chair and just say something like, I'm so happy my feet don't stink. And just like go crazy, just go, I'm so happy my feet don't stink. Just because it's really, you'll notice like you could be super grumpy. And if you do that, it's crazy and it's artificial, but it will at least temporarily change your state. And it's also something that you could sort of say, okay, I'm actually going to do that because it's so crazy and ridiculous. I can remember it. So if I'm in an emotional state, I need something that's not this like subtle thing. I need a big thing, big blinking, flashing light that I can listen to because my brain is half off because I'm in this emotional state. So the big jump up and wave your hands around from an sane eating emotional perspective is have on hand a go-to vegetable that you will just eat a whole heck of a lot of before you eat anything else. Okay. And then ideally the other stuff you're going to eat is going to be sane sweets. But if you can, it is very hard to eat a lot of insane food if you put a pound of cabbage into your stomach beforehand. And then what happens is actually you exceed your vegetable goals, and the next day, and this might sound a little far-fetched, okay, but we're getting into the advanced stuff here. If you want to feel great about yourself, if you're feeling really bad and you're about to do something that you think you might regret, and you not only avoid doing that thing, but instead you do something that furthers your goals. Like a lot of people use exercise for this, right? They want to go crazy, but instead they go to the gym and they exercise. And that builds up a huge amount of self-esteem and self-confidence, because not only did I not drink alcohol or have unhealthy sexual relations or take illegal drugs, but I took that negative and I turned it into a positive. So, and I know that's not easy. And I know sometimes it's got to be something kind of crazy to jolt us out of that state, but hopefully that is a long answer, and is at least there's some bits of nuggets of helpful wisdom in there for you. And let me just really quickly take a look at the chat here, because I've been rambling for quite some time. All right, here, what do we got here? All right, so it looks like we've got some good stuff here. Chocolate is good for us. Yes, they are good. Dinner is a dessert with me. Yep, so all good stuff here. For anybody who cookies, a brownie in a mug, I don't know. Sound of my feet saying, okay, cool. All right, well, please give me some feedback. If that was at all helpful, please let me know. Or if it wasn't and you want me to move on, please let me know too, because it's great feedback. So hopefully that helps though with some of the emotional eating. Because again, so if you say like, oh, I shouldn't eat emotionally. It's going to happen, right? So we need to look at it holistically. We need to look at it sanely, with lowercase sane and uppercase sane, and say, how do we sort of tackle all three components of it? So hopefully that is helpful. All right, so next question here. The good news is that I think we already answered this one. This is that my biggest challenge is that my family, husband, 8-year-old, my husband and my 8-year-old husband isn't 8 years old, does not wish to eat this way. So I feel I have to prepare 2 meals. I'm also very limited on my time. I get home very late in the evening and I have very little time to make a dinner plus homework with my son. So dinner doesn't always get the attention it needs. This has been a big challenge for the 2+ years I've been trying to do food the JB way. Great question. I think the cooking in bulk can be very helpful here. What I find is sometimes there's what we call modular meals. So let me give you an example of tacos. So you could make tacos and the taco meat and the guacamole and the salsa and the lettuce and the tomatoes. And if you want to put some sauteed peppers on that, most people like, not most, often a family will be like, tacos, yay, I like tacos. And what you can do in that case is, like, one, you could try to convince everyone else in your family to go SANE. We can talk about that. Or instead of having to cook 2 meals, the base of the meal is the same. And then maybe you have a taco salad and the other members of your family eat traditional tacos. The same thing can even apply with things like burgers